In the rolling hills of Texas, 1887, where the frontier was slowly giving way to civilization, but compassion remained as rare as water in a drought, one rancher's encounter with a desperate young woman would prove that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't just shelter, it's the chance to build a life of dignity and independence. This is the remarkable true story of how 3 words, "I have nowhere to go," sparked an act of generosity that would change 2 lives forever. Before we dive into this heartwarming tale of compassion and second chances, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you believe in the power of helping others stand on their own feet. What you're about to witness will restore your faith in human kindness. The broken dream. The dust swirled across the main street of Cedar Falls, Texas, as the afternoon stagecoach prepared to depart for Dallas. It was September 1887, and the small frontier town was bustling with the energy that came from being on the edge of progress. The railroad was coming through next year, bringing with it the promise of prosperity and growth. Benjamin Harper stood on the wooden sidewalk outside Morrison's general store, his weathered hands checking his supply list one final time. At 43, Benjamin was a man who had learned to measure his words as carefully as he measured his land. Standing just over 6 feet tall, with broad shoulders earned from 20 years of ranch work, he had the kind of steady presence that made people instinctively trust him. His ranch, the Circle H, sprawled across 4,000 acres of prime Texas grassland, about 8 miles north of Cedar Falls. Benjamin had built it from nothing after the Civil War, starting with a small homestead claim and gradually expanding through hard work, careful investments, and a reputation for fair dealing that had earned him the respect of neighbors and competitors alike. As Benjamin loaded his supplies into his wagon, he noticed a commotion near the stagecoach. A young woman was speaking animatedly with the driver, her voice carrying a note of desperation that made Benjamin pause in his work. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s, with auburn hair pulled back in a simple bun, and wearing a plain brown traveling dress that had seen better days. Even from a distance, Benjamin could see the tension in her posture and the way her hands clutched a small carpet bag, as if it contained everything she owned in the world. "I'm sorry, miss," the stagecoach driver was saying, his voice loud enough for half the street to hear. "But if you ain't got the fare, you can't ride. That's just how it works." Please," the young woman replied, her voice trembling with barely controlled emotion. "I only need to get to Fort Worth. I can pay you when I get there. I have family who will help me." The driver shook his head firmly. "Lady, I hear that story twice a week. No money, no ride. Simple as that." Benjamin found himself walking toward the stagecoach, drawn by something in the young woman's voice that reminded him of his own struggles during the lean years after the war. As he got closer, he could see that she was fighting back tears, her jaw set, with the kind of determination that comes from having nowhere else to turn. "Excuse me," Benjamin said politely, touching the brim of his hat. "Is there some kind of problem here?" The driver turned to Benjamin with visible relief. "Oh, hello there, Mr. Harper. This young lady wants to buy passage to Fort Worth, but she ain't got the money for it." Benjamin looked at the young woman, noting the proud way she held her head despite her obvious distress. "What's your name, miss?" "Victoria," she replied quietly. "Victoria Lawson. And I do have family in Fort Worth. My aunt runs a boarding house there. She sent me a letter saying she could give me work, but I need to get there first." Benjamin studied Victoria's face, seeing honesty in her green eyes, along with the kind of desperation that comes from having exhausted all other options. "What brings you to Cedar Falls, Miss Lawson?" Victoria's composure finally cracked, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "I came here because I was supposed to marry Charles Fleming. We'd been corresponding for 6 months, and he promised to meet me at the station and take me to the church. But when I got here yesterday, he wasn't there," Benjamin guessed. Victoria nodded, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. "The hotel clerk told me Mr. Fleming left town 3 days ago, married the banker's daughter and moved to Austin. He never even left me a message. Benjamin felt anger rising in his chest. He knew Charles Fleming by reputation, a smooth-talking land speculator who had been involved in several questionable business deals around Cedar Falls. The idea that Fleming would abandon a young woman who had traveled hundreds of miles to marry him was despicable, even by Fleming's low standards. "So, now you want to go to Fort Worth," Benjamin said. "It's the only place I have left to go," Victoria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I spent my last money on the hotel room last night, and I've been sitting in the lobby all day, trying to figure out what to do." Benjamin glanced around the small crowd that had gathered to watch the drama unfold. He could see the mixture of curiosity and judgment in their faces, some sympathetic, others clearly thinking that Victoria had brought her troubles on herself by trusting a man she'd never met. "How much is the fare to Fort Worth?" Benjamin asked the driver. $8, the driver replied. Benjamin reached into his pocket and pulled out a small roll of bills. He counted out $8 and handed them to the driver. "Miss Lawson's passage is paid." Victoria stared at Benjamin in shock. "Sir, I can't accept that. I don't even know you. I'm Benjamin Harper. I own a ranch north of town." He touched his hat brim again. "And it's already done, miss. The driver has his money." "But why?" Victoria asked, her voice filled with confusion and gratitude. "Why would you help a complete stranger?" Benjamin was quiet for a moment, thinking about how to explain something he wasn't entirely sure he understood himself. "Let's just say I know what it's like to be far from home with nowhere to turn. Sometimes we all need a helping hand." The stagecoach driver cleared his throat impatiently. "Well, if you're riding, miss, you'd better get aboard. We're already behind schedule." Victoria started toward the stagecoach, then stopped and turned back to Benjamin. "Mr. Harper, I don't know how to thank you, but I promise I'll find a way to pay you back someday." "No need for that," Benjamin replied. "Just take care of yourself." As Victoria climbed into the stagecoach, Benjamin noticed that she was moving carefully, as if she were injured or ill. When she settled into her seat by the window, he could see that her face was pale and drawn with exhaustion. "Actually," Benjamin said suddenly, surprising himself, "Miss Lawson, can you step down for a moment? I'd like to have a word with you." Victoria looked confused, but complied, stepping down from the stagecoach with obvious difficulty. Now that she was closer, Benjamin could see that she was trembling slightly, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and inadequate meals. "When did you last eat?" Benjamin asked gently. Victoria's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I had some bread this morning." Before that?" Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "Day before yesterday, I think." Benjamin made a decision that would change both their lives. "Miss Lawson, I don't think you're in any condition to travel to Fort Worth today. Why don't you come out to my ranch for a few days, get some rest and proper meals, and then we can arrange passage to Fort Worth when you're feeling stronger?" Victoria stared at him in amazement. "Sir, I couldn't possibly impose on you like that. You've already done more than enough." "It's no imposition. I've got plenty of room, and my housekeeper makes enough food to feed half the county." Benjamin's voice was firm but kind. "Besides, traveling when you're sick and exhausted is dangerous. You might collapse before you reach Fort Worth." The stagecoach driver was growing increasingly impatient. "Folks, I need to know right now if she's riding or not. I've got a schedule to keep." Victoria looked from Benjamin to the stagecoach, clearly torn between accepting more charity and doing what she knew was the sensible thing. Finally, exhaustion won out over pride. "Mr. Harper," she said quietly, "if you're sure it wouldn't be too much trouble." "No trouble at all," Benjamin replied, already moving to retrieve Victoria's small bag from the stagecoach. "Driver, the lady's changed her mind. She won't be traveling today after all." As the stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, Benjamin helped Victoria into his wagon and began the journey to his ranch. During the 8-mile ride, he learned more about her story, how she had grown up on a small farm in Missouri, lost her parents to illness, and eventually been forced to seek work as a governess in St. Louis. "That's where I met Charles," Victoria explained, as the wagon bumped along the rutted road. He was visiting the family I worked for, and he seemed so charming and successful. When he asked me to correspond with him, I thought it was the answer to my prayers." "How long did you know him before he proposed?" Benjamin asked. "That's just it. We never actually met in person until yesterday. All our courtship was through letters. He painted such a wonderful picture of life in Texas, of the home we would build together." Victoria's voice trailed off. "I suppose I was just desperate enough to believe what I wanted to believe." As they approached the Circle H ranch, Benjamin found himself seeing his property through Victoria's eyes. The main house was a solid two-story structure built of local stone and timber, with a wide front porch and flower beds that his housekeeper, Rosa Martinez, tended with loving care. "It's beautiful," Victoria said softly. "You've built something wonderful here." "It's taken 20 years," Benjamin replied. "But yes, I'm proud of what we've accomplished." As they pulled up to the front porch, Rosa emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, Rosa had been part of Benjamin's household for 12 years. "Rosa," Benjamin said in Spanish, "this is Miss Victoria Lawson. She's going to be staying with us for a few days." Rosa took one look at Victoria's pale, exhausted face and immediately went into caretaker mode. "Pobrecita," she murmured, helping Victoria down from the wagon. "You look half dead. Come, we get you fed and rested." As Rosa led Victoria into the house, fussing over her in a mixture of English and Spanish, Benjamin unloaded his supplies and tried to understand what had prompted him to invite a complete stranger into his home. He was normally a cautious man, careful about whom he trusted, and slow to get involved in other people's problems. But something about Victoria Lawson had touched him. Perhaps it was the dignity with which she faced her desperate circumstances, or the way she had tried to maintain her composure, even when her world was falling apart. That evening, as he sat on his front porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Benjamin reflected on the strange turn his day had taken. This morning, he had been a confirmed bachelor focused solely on his ranch and his cattle. Now he found himself responsible for a young woman who had nowhere else to go and no one else to turn to. It was a responsibility he hadn't asked for, but as he listened to the sound of Victoria and Rosa talking quietly in the kitchen, Benjamin realized it was one he was glad to have accepted. The gift of dignity. Victoria woke on her third morning at the Circle H ranch feeling more human than she had in weeks. Rosa's cooking and motherly care had worked wonders. The dark circles under her eyes had faded, color had returned to her cheeks, and for the first time since arriving in Texas, she felt strong enough to think clearly about her future. After breakfast, she found Benjamin on the front porch, reviewing account books and planning the day's work. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the rolling grassland stretched away toward the distant hills like a green carpet dotted with cattle. "Good morning, Mr. Harper," Victoria said, settling into the chair Rosa had brought for her. "I wanted to thank you again for your kindness. I feel like a new person." Benjamin looked up from his ledgers and smiled. "You look like a new person, too. Rosa's been worried about you, said you were running on nothing but determination when you got here." "She's been wonderful to me, you both have." Victoria paused, gathering her courage for what she needed to say next. "Mr. Harper, I've been thinking about my situation, and I need to be honest with you about something." Benjamin set down his pen and gave her his full attention. "What's on your mind?" Victoria took a deep breath. "I lied about my aunt in Fort Worth. I do have an aunt there, but she didn't offer me work. I haven't heard from her in over 2 years, and I'm not even sure she's still alive." Benjamin's expression didn't change, but Victoria could see him processing this information. "Why did you tell me she had offered you a job?" "Because I was desperate and embarrassed," Victoria replied, her cheeks burning with shame. "I couldn't bear to admit that I had literally nowhere to go, no one who would help me. The story about my aunt was, well, it was the only hope I could think of." Benjamin was quiet for a moment, then asked, "So what's your real plan?" Victoria's composure began to crack. "Sir, I have nowhere to go," she said, her voice breaking as tears started to flow. "No family, no friends, no money, no prospects. Charles Fleming wasn't just my fiancé, he was my only chance at a future. Without him, I'm completely alone in the world." Benjamin watched Victoria struggle with her emotions, and he found himself deeply moved by her honesty. It would have been easy for her to continue the deception about her aunt, but she had chosen to tell him the truth, even though it meant admitting her desperate circumstances. "Victoria," he said gently, "I'm glad you told me the truth. But it doesn't change anything about your being welcome here." Victoria looked up at him through her tears. "Mr. Harper, I can't stay here indefinitely. It wouldn't be proper, and I can't continue accepting your charity without giving something back." "Who says you're not giving something back?" Benjamin asked. "Rosa's been happier these past few days than I've seen her in months. She loves having another woman to talk to and fuss over, and you've been helping with the cooking and cleaning, even when you were barely strong enough to stand up." "That's not the same as earning my keep," Victoria protested. "I need to find real work, a way to support myself." Benjamin leaned back in his chair, an idea beginning to form in his mind. "What kind of work are you qualified for?" "I was a governess for 3 years in St. Louis. Before that, I helped run our family farm until my parents died. I can read and write, do arithmetic, manage a household, tend a garden, care for children." Victoria paused. "Why do you ask?" "Because there might be more opportunities around here than you realize," Benjamin said thoughtfully. "Cedar Falls is growing fast. The railroad coming through next year means more families will be moving to the area, and many of them will need exactly the kind of services you can provide." Victoria felt a flicker of hope. "You really think there might be work for me here?" "I know there will be. The question is whether you want to stay in Cedar Falls or still prefer to try your luck in a big city like Fort Worth or Dallas." Victoria looked out across the peaceful ranch landscape, thinking about the kindness she had received from Benjamin and Rosa, the sense of safety and belonging she had felt for the first time in years. "I think I'd like to stay," she said quietly. "If there's really a chance to build a life here." Benjamin nodded decisively. "Then let's make sure you have that chance. But Victoria, I want you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll never again feel like you have to lie about your circumstances. There's no shame in needing help, and there's no shame in starting over. Everyone deserves a second chance." Over the following weeks, Benjamin proved as good as his word. He introduced Victoria to several families in Cedar Falls who were looking for domestic help, tutoring services, or someone to care for their children. Within a month, Victoria had steady work with 3 different families, earning enough money to rent a small room above the bakery in town. But Benjamin had something else in mind, something that would give Victoria not just work, but real independence and security. The idea came to him during one of his regular visits to Cedar Falls, when he overheard a conversation between 2 women complaining about the lack of proper boarding house accommodations in town. With the railroad coming and new families arriving regularly, there was a real need for clean, respectable lodging. That evening, Benjamin approached Victoria with a proposal that would change her life forever. "Victoria," he said as they sat on the ranch porch after dinner, "I've been thinking about your future, and I have an idea I'd like you to consider." "What kind of idea?" Benjamin pulled out a folded piece of paper from his shirt pocket. "There's a piece of property in town that's come up for sale. It's a good-sized lot with an old house that needs some work, but it's in a prime location near the main street." Victoria looked at the paper, which appeared to be a property listing. "It looks expensive." "It is expensive. But it's also exactly the right size and location for a boarding house. With the railroad coming through next year, a well-run boarding house could be very profitable." Victoria's heart began to race as she understood what Benjamin was suggesting. "You think I could run a boarding house?" "I think you could run the best boarding house in East Texas," Benjamin replied with conviction. "You have all the skills. You can cook, clean, manage finances, deal with people, and you understand what it's like to need a safe, welcoming place to stay. But Mr. Harper, I don't have the money to buy property or renovate a house. I'm barely earning enough to pay for my room at the bakery. Benjamin smiled. That's where my proposition comes in. I'll buy the property and pay for the renovations. You'll manage the boarding house and keep all the profits after expenses. When you've earned enough to pay me back for the initial investment, the property becomes yours free and clear. Victoria stared at Benjamin in amazement. You would do that for me? But what if the business fails? What if I can't pay you back? Then I'll own a boarding house in a growing town, which isn't exactly a financial disaster, Benjamin replied pragmatically. But Victoria, I don't think the business will fail. I think you're going to be very successful. Why? Victoria asked, her voice filled with wonder. Why would you take such a risk on someone you barely know? Benjamin was quiet for a moment, looking out across his ranch in the gathering twilight. Because 23 years ago, I was a broken-down ex-soldier with nothing but a few dollars in my pocket and a homestead claim. A banker named Jonathan Morrison took a chance on me, loaned me money for cattle when no one else would. He said every person deserves the opportunity to prove what they're capable of. And you're paying it forward, Victoria said softly. I suppose I am. But Victoria, this isn't charity. This is a business partnership based on my belief that you have what it takes to succeed. If you're willing to work hard and take some risks, I think we can build something special. Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of joy and gratitude rather than despair. Mr. Harper, I don't know what to say. Yes, of course, yes. I'll work harder than you can imagine to make this succeed. I know you will, Benjamin replied. Now let's start planning how to turn that old house into the finest boarding establishment in Cedar Falls. Over the next several months, Victoria threw herself into the project with an energy and enthusiasm that amazed everyone who knew her. She worked alongside the carpenters and painters renovating the house, learning every detail of the building so she could maintain it properly. The boarding house opened its doors in March 1888, just 3 months before the railroad was scheduled to arrive in Cedar Falls. Victoria had named it The Haven, and from the very first day, it lived up to its name as a place where travelers could find comfort, good food, and genuine hospitality. But as successful as the boarding house was becoming, Victoria's most important transformation was personal. The frightened, broken woman who had sobbed, "I have nowhere to go," was gone, replaced by someone who had learned that home isn't just a place. It's the life you build with your own hands and the community you create around yourself. Building more than walls. By the spring of 1888, the Haven boarding house had become the talk of Cedar Falls. Victoria's attention to detail, warm hospitality, and excellent cooking had created a reputation that spread far beyond the small Texas town. Railroad surveyors, land speculators, traveling salesmen, and families looking to relocate all sought out the Haven when they needed lodging in Cedar Falls. But Victoria's success brought with it new challenges and unexpected complications. The morning of April 15th found Victoria in her kitchen at dawn, preparing breakfast for her 12 current guests. The railroad construction crews had arrived in town the previous week, and the Haven was booked solid for the next 2 months. Victoria should have been celebrating her good fortune, but instead she was struggling with a problem she hadn't anticipated. "Rosa, I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," Victoria said as she flipped pancakes on the griddle while simultaneously stirring a pot of oatmeal. "I'm averaging 4 hours of sleep a night, and I still can't keep up with all the work." Rosa Martinez, who had been helping at the Haven since it opened, nodded sympathetically. "You need more help, Mija. One person cannot run a 12-room boarding house alone. But hiring help means less profit, and I need every dollar I can save to pay Mr. Harper back," Victoria replied, exhaustion evident in her voice. "I've calculated that if I can maintain this level of occupancy for 2 more years, I'll have enough to pay him back and own the property free and clear." And if you work yourself to death in the meantime?" Rosa asked pointedly. "Benjamin did not invest in this business, so you could kill yourself running it." Victoria knew Rosa was right, but her pride and determination to succeed independently were making it difficult for her to accept that she needed help. She had come so far from the desperate woman who had arrived in Cedar Falls 8 months ago, and she was terrified of doing anything that might jeopardize her progress. Her dilemma was interrupted by a knock at the back door. Victoria opened it to find Benjamin Harper standing on her porch, his hat in his hands and a concerned expression on his face. "Good morning, Victoria. I hope I'm not intruding, but I wanted to check on how things are going." "Mr. Harper, please come in. Rosa and I were just discussing the challenges of success." Benjamin stepped into the kitchen and immediately noticed the signs of Victoria's exhaustion, the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands from too much coffee and too little sleep, the way she moved with the careful deliberation of someone operating on pure willpower. "Victoria, when did you last take a full day off?" he asked gently. Victoria paused in her cooking, realizing she couldn't remember. Well, there's always something that needs doing. The guests expect a well-run establishment, not a hostess who's about to collapse from exhaustion." Benjamin interrupted. "Rosa's right, you need help, but the expense," Victoria began, "will be offset by your ability to maintain quality service and expand your business," Benjamin finished. "Victoria, you're thinking like someone who's afraid of losing what she has, instead of someone who's building something permanent." Benjamin pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table. "Let me tell you what I see when I look at the Haven. I see a business that's successful because of your vision and hard work. I see a reputation for quality that will outlast any temporary downturn. And I see a young woman who's proven she can turn an abandoned house into the most sought-after lodging in the county." "You really think I've proven that?" Victoria asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. "I know you've proven that. But Victoria, success isn't just about paying off debts or owning property. It's about building something sustainable, something that will provide security for years to come." Over the following hour, Benjamin and Victoria worked out a plan to expand the Haven's staff. They would hire 2 local women to help with cleaning and cooking, and Victoria would train them to maintain the high standards that had made the Haven successful. But Benjamin had something else in mind, a proposal that would solve Victoria's immediate problems while creating new opportunities for both of them. "Victoria, I have an idea that might seem unusual, but I'd like you to consider it," he said as Rosa served them coffee. "What would you think about expanding the Haven?" Victoria looked confused. "Expanding how? The house is already full to capacity." "I'm not talking about the house. I'm talking about building a new structure, a proper hotel with 20 rooms, a dining room that could serve the general public, maybe even space for shops on the ground floor." Victoria's eyes widened. "Mr. Harper, that would cost a fortune, and the risk would be manageable if we structured it right," Benjamin replied. "The railroad is bringing permanent changes to Cedar Falls. This town is going to grow from a population of 800 to several thousand over the next 5 years." Benjamin pulled out a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "I've been looking at the lot next to the Haven. It's for sale, and it's the perfect size for what I have in mind. We could build a first-class hotel that would serve not just travelers, but also special events, business meetings, family celebrations." Victoria felt her pulse quickening as she began to understand the scope of Benjamin's vision. "You're talking about creating the finest hotel between Dallas and Fort Worth." "Exactly. And you would be the manager and eventual owner, just like our current arrangement." Victoria stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the bustling main street of Cedar Falls. She could see the changes that the railroad had already brought: new businesses, new faces, new energy. But she could also see the enormous risks involved in Benjamin's proposal. "Mr. Harper, what you're suggesting, it's incredible, but it's also terrifying. What if I'm not capable of managing something that large?" "Victoria," Benjamin interrupted gently, 8 months ago, you were a woman with no money, no prospects, and no hope. Today, you're running the most successful boarding house in the county. If you can make that transformation, you can certainly manage a hotel. Victoria turned back to face Benjamin, her mind racing with possibilities and fears. "Why are you willing to take such a big risk on me?" Benjamin smiled. "Because I've learned that the best investments aren't in land or cattle or buildings. They're in people. And Victoria, you're the kind of person who turns every opportunity into success." The resistance to Victoria's expansion plans came from an unexpected source: Harold Westbrook, who owned the town's only other lodging establishment, a rundown inn that had been failing even before the haven opened. Westbrook had been spreading rumors that Victoria was an outsider, taking business away from established local merchants. The situation came to a head during a town council meeting in late May, when Westbrook formally objected to the building permits for the new hotel. "Gentlemen," Westbrook addressed the council, "I object to this project on the grounds that it will create unfair competition for existing businesses. Miss Lawson is not a long-time resident of our community." Victoria, who had been invited to address the council about her plans, stood up to respond. But before she could speak, Benjamin rose from his seat in the back of the room. "Mr. Westbrook raises an interesting point about community membership," Benjamin said, his voice carrying clearly through the small meeting hall. "Let me ask you this. What makes someone a true member of a community? Is it how long they've lived here, or is it what they contribute?" Benjamin walked to the front of the room, his presence commanding attention from everyone present. "In the 8 months since Victoria Lawson arrived in Cedar Falls, she has created jobs for 6 local women, purchased supplies from dozens of local merchants, and brought hundreds of visitors to our town who have spent money at our stores and restaurants." He turned to face Westbrook directly. "In that same 8 months, your establishment has continued to decline, not because of unfair competition, but because you've refused to adapt to changing circumstances or invest in improvements." The room was silent as Benjamin continued. "Victoria Lawson came to Cedar Falls with nothing but determination and a willingness to work hard. She has proven herself through her actions, not her words. If that's not the kind of person we want as part of our community, then we don't deserve the prosperity that people like her can bring us." When Benjamin finished speaking, the council voted unanimously to approve the building permits for the new hotel. But more importantly, Victoria realized that she had found something she had never expected when she arrived in Cedar Falls as a desperate, homeless woman. She had found not just a place to live, but a place where she truly belonged. The foundation of home. The grand opening of the Cedar Falls Hotel took place on October 15, 1888, exactly 1 year and 1 month after Victoria had first stepped off the stagecoach with nothing but a carpetbag and a broken heart. The 3-story brick building stood like a monument to determination and second chances, its elegant facade and modern amenities drawing visitors from across East Texas. Victoria stood in the hotel's spacious lobby, watching as guests mingled during the opening reception. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished wood floors, and the sound of laughter and conversation filled the air. It was everything she had dreamed of, and more than she had ever dared to hope for. "Quite a transformation from that day at the stagecoach station," Benjamin said, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Victoria accepted the glass gratefully, her eyes still surveying the scene before them. "Sometimes I feel like that desperate woman was someone else entirely." "It belongs to the same person," Benjamin replied firmly. "You just learned what you were capable of when given the opportunity." The hotel had exceeded everyone's expectations. All 20 rooms were booked for the opening week. The dining room had reservations extending into December, and Victoria had already received inquiries about hosting weddings and business conferences. As the evening progressed, Victoria found herself in conversation with many of the town's leading citizens, people who had initially been skeptical of the outsider with big plans, but who now welcomed her as one of their own. "Miss Lawson," said Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the banker's wife, "I wanted to personally thank you for what you've done for our community. The hotel is beautiful. But more than that, you've shown us what's possible when someone has vision and determination. Thank you, Mrs. Whitman. But I couldn't have done any of this without the support of people like you and Mr. Harper. Nonsense, Mrs. Whitman replied. Mr. Harper provided the opportunity, but you provided the courage and hard work. Later that evening, after the last guest had departed and the staff had finished cleaning up, Victoria and Benjamin sat in the hotel's quiet dining room, sharing a final glass of wine and reflecting on the day's success. Benjamin, Victoria said, using his first name for the first time, I need to tell you something important. Benjamin looked up from his wine glass, noting the serious tone in her voice. What's on your mind? Victoria reached into her reticule and pulled out a folded document. This is a bank draft for the full amount I owe you for the Haven and the hotel. With today's receipts and my saved profits, I can pay you back completely. Benjamin stared at the bank draft, then looked up at Victoria with surprise. Already? Victoria, it's only been a year. I expected it to take at least 3 years. The railroad brought more business than we projected, and the hotel's opening exceeded our estimates, Victoria explained. I can afford to pay you back now, and I want to. You took a risk on someone who had nothing, and you deserve to see that investment returned. Benjamin took the bank draft but didn't unfold it. Instead, he set it on the table between them and looked directly at Victoria. What if I told you I didn't want the money back right now? Victoria looked confused. I don't understand. Victoria, you've proven that you can succeed beyond anyone's wildest expectations. You've built not just one business, but 2 thriving enterprises. You've created jobs, brought prosperity to this town, and established yourself as one of Cedar Falls's most respected citizens. Benjamin leaned forward, his expression serious. But more than that, you've discovered something about yourself that I saw from the very beginning. You're not just capable of surviving, you're capable of flourishing. What are you saying? Victoria asked. I'm saying that instead of paying me back, I'd like you to consider a different arrangement. Keep the money, use it to expand even further. There are opportunities in Dallas, in Fort Worth, in Houston. You could build a chain of hotels, become one of the most successful businesswomen in Texas. Victoria stared at Benjamin in amazement. You want me to expand beyond Cedar Falls? I want you to reach your full potential, Benjamin replied, and I don't think we've seen that yet. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, considering Benjamin's proposal. The idea of expansion was exciting, but it also meant leaving the place where she had found not just success, but belonging. Benjamin, she said finally, a year ago, I was a woman who had nowhere to go. Today, I'm a woman who could go anywhere. But you know what I've learned? What's that? Having nowhere to go and having everywhere to go aren't really that different if you don't have someone to share the journey with. Victoria reached across the table and took Benjamin's hand. I don't want to expand to other cities. I want to build something here in Cedar Falls with the people who believed in me when I had nothing. Benjamin smiled, understanding dawning in his eyes. And what exactly do you want to build? A life, Victoria said simply. A real life with roots and community and... She paused, her cheeks coloring slightly. And maybe someone special to share it with, if he's interested. Benjamin's smile widened as he squeezed her hand gently. I think he might be very interested indeed. 2 years later, Benjamin and Victoria Harper stood on the porch of their home, the same ranch house where a desperate young woman had once sobbed that she had nowhere to go. Now it was filled with laughter, love, and the sounds of the 3 children they had taken in from the local orphanage. The Cedar Falls Hotel continued to thrive under Victoria's management, but more importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when someone was given not just charity, but opportunity. Victoria had established a fund to help other women in desperate circumstances, providing them with the same chance for independence and dignity that Benjamin had given her. Do you ever think about that day at the stagecoach station? Benjamin asked, as they watched their children play in the yard. Victoria smiled, her hand resting on her growing belly. Their first child together was due in the spring. Every day, but not with sadness anymore, That was the day my real life began. Mine too, Benjamin replied, pulling her close. I thought I was just buying a stagecoach ticket for a stranger. Turns out I was investing in my own future happiness. As the Texas sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her from desperation to joy. She had learned that home wasn't a place you were born, but a place you built with love, courage, and the kindness of others. The woman who had once cried, "Sir, I have nowhere to go," was gone forever, replaced by someone who knew that with determination and the support of good people, you could build a home anywhere your heart led you. This incredible true story shows us that sometimes our lowest moments are just the beginning of our greatest triumphs. Victoria's desperate plea for help found the right person at the right time, someone who didn't just offer charity, but the chance to build a life of dignity and independence. If this story of second chances and the power of believing in others inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing true stories that prove we all have the potential for greatness when given the opportunity. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. Remember, we never know when we might encounter someone having their worst day, someone who feels like they have nowhere to go. When that moment comes, I hope you'll remember Benjamin Harper and find the courage to offer not just help, but hope. Until next time, keep believing in the power of second chances and the magic that happens when we invest in each other's dreams.